Hey there, and welcome to Healthy-ish. This is your daily podcast, well, almost daily podcast from Body and Soul. I am your host, Felicity Harley. Oh, we're all having to adjust to rapid changes right now, whether you're in lockdown, whether you're out of lockdown, wherever your situation. How are you coping? How are you adjusting? Your plans, your day-to-day, your future. One thing that always seems to be there with us and sometimes stops us from moving forward is fear. So how can we get better at embracing and sitting with this fear and controlling our fear without letting it control us? Well, psychologist and author Dr. Amy Silver has a new book out called The Loudest Guest. Yes, you can guess what that's about. Her big thing is that if you get your fear under control, it can be a game changer for not only the day ahead, but your future as well. So she's going to tell us all about that today. Now, we keep our Healthy-ish episodes quite short, but if you want to hear today's full interview, where Amy talks, well, more about fear, how to get it under control, what it feels like, why we need to feel, and how we can move forward and why self-compassion is important in this. Search for Extra Healthy-ish wherever you get your awesome podcasts, like this one, of course. Dr. Amy Silver, welcome to Healthy-ish, and congratulations on your new book, one many of us need right now as we're having to, I suppose, adjust to these changes that are happening during COVID. And at the root of these change is fear, which is what your book is all about. So can you talk us through the most common response to fear?
Sure. Well, fear is the thing that kind of is around for us a lot. I think a lot of the time, though, we try and suppress it and we pretend it's not there. So even though we are in fearful times, I think fear has always been there for us. We just don't necessarily face into it. And what it looks like for us is that classic fight or flight or freeze response that we know about anxiety and that suited us when we were meeting saber-toothed tigers on the savannah. And now we kind of need to employ that clever part of our brain rather than that instinct of fight or flight or freeze. Because when it hits us in our current state is that it pushes us into either avoidance. So we avoid the thing that we are fearing, or we fight and we kind of attack and sort of get quite defensive or protective. And both those responses in this current situation don't really help us because the fear thing is still there, but our response is actually the thing that we need to manage, our response to that feared thing.
Okay, so I like when you said we need to get clever. I like that word clever in, I suppose, controlling our fear, embracing sitting with our fear. How can we do this?
So the fear response is something that happens in that really primal part of our brain, that really core part of our brain that's, I guess, the early part of our brain development. And then the clever part of our brain sits around the outside. And that's the bit that does all our executive thinking, that decision making, the reasoning, the abstract thinking. And that's how we communicate. That's how we move through our world, is with that clever part. But when we are being controlled by that core part, that emotional part of our brain, we leave ourselves pretty vulnerable to reacting to what's going on rather than choosing our response. So we want to shift out of that core part of our brain into the clever part of our brain. And really a lot of that is turning towards that fear and saying, okay, I can hear you've been triggered. You want me to do this. You want me to avoid. You want me to batten down the hatches. You want me to resist. You want me to attack. I get that. Is that the most sensible thing for us to do right now? Is that going to help me in what it is that I'm trying to achieve? And that's the clever bit, is actually turning towards that fear and having a conversation that allows us to, I guess, take ourselves out of that passive role of having to do what fear wants us to do and choosing what we want to do that's going to take us closer to our goals.
How can you get better at recognizing that it is fear speaking to you, that you're reacting to fear rather than perhaps another emotion?
It's such a good question. And I think it's a lifelong mission to build this relationship with our fear so that we can understand it and say, oh, wow, that's been triggered for me, or that's triggering for me. And that's similar to this part of my life, or it's reminding me of this, or that's my usual habit or pattern, or this is how I protect myself. And once we understand the rules by which we are living, and we get some level of consciousness over that, we can start to negotiate a little bit more and say, well, I get how you protected me back then with this particular scenario, but with this particular scenario, things are different, or I have more skills, or I have more capability, or more things to rely on. And so we want to get this relationship with our fear that means that we can talk to it and get a chance to sort of say, okay, that's the story. What are the facts? Where do I use this to harness that fear and allow me to take the messages, but not the drama, and choose something? But I think in answer to your question, it's a relationship building task that we need to go on. And as I said at the beginning, I think one of the skills that we have as humans is that we've suppressed our relationship with fear. We've denied that it's there. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to name it. We want to sort of just get on with life or pretend that it's not there. And that actually may work in some circumstances. But right now, it's going to get harder for us to deny it. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing that we're having to face into our fears and say, okay, well, let's try and understand, what does fear want? What do I want? And how do I disentangle that so that I know that I'm making the right choice?
In many ways, perhaps the pandemic has made us realise that fear exists. You know, often perhaps we used to push it away and think, no, I'm strong, I can deal with this. You know, especially as a woman, you like to think, no, I can take on anything. But perhaps fear has let us, you know, lean into our vulnerabilities in many ways. So what's your top tip for overcoming fear in this pandemic?
I think it's about exactly what you just said, turning towards it and saying, okay, come on, let's hear what you've got to say. My top tips really are around taking a pen to paper and allowing fear to have a voice, allowing yourself to get uncomfortable with hearing what those messages are, but at the same time being able to step back from it and evaluate it so that you kind of can extract whether it's helpful, whether it's useful. So once we start writing, we can start naming our emotions and we can start fine-tuning it. You know, we all kind of have different words for fear. You know, some of it is anxiety or worry or stress or pressure or burnout or all of these words that we attach to it. But we can get even more emotional language if we really invest time in thinking about it. And once we have a name for it that's really quite specific to what I'm feeling right now, that gives us a clue on what the solution might be. So writing things down, getting closer to it, and doing that with a sense of compassion towards ourselves and our feelings. It's almost like we want to say, hey, you know, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming into my life, fear or anxiety or worry or stress or doubt, because what you're doing is sending me a signal. And that signal could be really, really helpful to me because it may be showing me what I care about, what I don't want to lose, what I want in my life, how I'm trying to strive towards something. It's got these gorgeous messages, you know, around the fear of failure or the fear of missing out or the fear of not being good enough. These are beautiful fears that allow us the space to be more. We just don't want it to get to that stage where it's commanding us so much that we reduce what we're capable of doing. And so we need to get to a stage where we can evaluate it. And once we hear what it is, we can say, okay, are you useful to me? Are you helping me? And are you true? Are you really true? Is it true that if I don't go out, I feel better? Is it true that if I don't speak to people tonight, because I can't be bothered, that's going to make me feel better? Is that true? And so we want to just have this dialogue and say, you know, what are the things that you're doing that are helping me? And what are the things that you're doing that actually create more of a small life for me and that are probably going to build up and make it even harder for me to enjoy my life? So, you know, you don't go out or you know, I mean, obviously I'm not talking about if you're in hard lockdown, but if you don't go out and enjoy the sunshine, or you don't go out and you don't have a coffee with somebody, are you you're saving yourself that day from the stress. But if you do that consistently, it's really easy to see how you fall off the wagon, and it just, everything becomes harder. And the thing about fear is, if we allow it to dominate us instead of just commentating for us, we start to really reduce what we're able to do, and we kind of just fall out of practice with our lives and how to stretch them.
Yeah, some great questions there we can all ask ourselves. Amy, thank you for coming on Healthy-ish.
Thank you for having me.
If you want more from Dr. Amy Silver, or Amy, her new book is called The Loudest Guest: How to Control and Change Your Relationship with Fear. If you want more from Amy, we also have more on our big sister podcast. It's called Extra Healthy-ish. It's our new podcast from Body and Soul that gives you that little bit extra in your day. Extra interviews, extra insights, and extra healthy advice for your mind, body, and soul. Extra Healthy-ish publishes a new episode for your wonderfully healthy ears every morning, Monday to Thursday. For more info, head to bodyandsoul.com.au or follow us on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks again for listening to this episode with Amy. If you have a moment, we'd be so grateful if you could jump on and rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. And until tomorrow, stay healthy-ish.